Hello, welcome to Oxford Heirlooms. In this video, we're going to sew the entredeaux and ruffled lace to the edge of the neck, but I'm not going to sew it down the front of the garment yet, because this is going to be sort of a complicated step. The pattern directions give some vague instructions on how to do this, but they intend for you to do it by hand, and I'm going to be using French machine sewing techniques. All right, now the first thing, if you recall, I marked my entredeaux 11.5 inches from the end for it to be the neck piece. Now, normally when you put entredeaux on a neck piece, we would overlap it by 1/2 inch on either side and then tack it down when we get it finished. So I'm going to put a mark 1/2 inch from the edge. I'm also going to use my sewing gauge. I'm going to put a mark 1/2 inch from my original 11.5 inch mark. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the entredeaux in half. I've got the end to the 11.5 inch mark, and I've got my 2/2 inch marks lined up. And coming here to the back middle, this is going to be the back middle of the garment, I'm going to make a little blue mark. Okay, so let me kind of repeat what I just did. From the end of the entredeaux, I've marked it at 1/2 inch from the end, okay? I've marked it at 11.5 inches from the end. I've marked it at 11 inches, and then in between the 1/2 inch mark and the 11 inch mark, I folded it in half and I marked it again. Now, I'm gonna start pinning this. I've got my back and front pieces. I'm going to start pinning this from the right front side. Okay, so I'm going to bring my entredeaux in, and I'm going to overlap that 1/2 inch from the neck facing, because eventually we will tack that down when we get finished with the garment. So I'm going to start pinning along the, oh wait a minute, before I do that, what I need to do with my embroidery scissors, since I have to go along a curve, I'm going to make little notches about every 1/2 inch from the 1/2 inch mark to the 11 inch mark. Almost forgot to do this. Just keep going right past the back center and just cut some little notches without cutting the entredeaux. And when you get up to that 11 inch mark, make one last clip, but don't clip at the, well, we can go ahead and clip at the 11.5 inch mark also. Okay, now I'm going to overlap it by that 1/2 inch. And since the entredeaux is now notched, it will curve smoothly along the neck edge of the garment. So I'm on the front right side of the day gown first. Drop my pen. Come up around. I'm going to go ahead and video all of this because this particular step was probably the most complicated for me to figure out how to do. Okay, when I get up to the shoulder seam, I'm just going to make sure that my shoulder seam is pressed and facing towards the back and pin that down. And then I'm going to keep going. If you recall, on the top of the back, we had a little blue mark where the gathering threads start. So I'm going to pin to that point, put one last pin in where that blue mark was, and then I'm going to stop pinning along here for right now. Okay, now in the back center of the garment, where we were smocking, I had a blue line that I drew in the center of my pattern piece. So the little mark on the entredeaux that represents the back center, I'm going to line that up because I want my day gown back to actually be in the center of the neckband. Then I'm going to come over to the left front facing where my buttonhole is, and I'm going to extend that 11.5 inch mark 1/2 inch past the edge of the facing, and I'm going to start pinning going to pinning in, heading to the left this time, heading up towards the shoulder seam. And this entree curves as it goes up. When I get to the shoulder seam, I'm going to make sure that my shoulder seam is pressed and pointed towards the back, and go ahead and pin that in. And then I'm going to put one more pin in. There's a blue mark at the other end of the gathering line. Put a pin in at that blue mark, and then we need to do some gathering. Okay, so we've got that pinned on. The entree is not twisted, and we've got it pinned on. Now I'm going to very carefully, I'm going to come to the inside of the garment, and my gathering threads, because they've been handled a little bit since we originally sewed them in, it may take me a minute to use my seam ripper, grab the two gathering threads, untangle them from the front two gathering threads. Oh, that worked out pretty quickly. Yay. Okay, now on one side of the back neck, I'm going to start gathering and moving my gathers along until it is the same length as the entree between the end of the gathering thread and the center back. And then I just want to move my gathers along the gathering thread until they're evenly spaced. Okay, now I can pin that side in place. Okay, now I'm going to come to the other side that hasn't been gathered yet. And once again, using my seam ripper, I'm going to carefully grab my gathering threads. Got the bottom one right here. And I've got the top one right there. And then I'm going to proceed to pull my gathering threads and pull those back gathers until they're the same length as the entree from the center pin to the blue mark where the gathering thread stopped. And once again, move your gathers along the gathering thread until they're evenly spaced. And then we'll pin that to the entree. Okay. All right, now what I'm going to do is my gathering threads are hanging out here, and they're kind of long, and they're going to be in my way. So at both places where I have gathering threads, I'm going to collect them into a little bundle. Take me a minute to find them. And then I'm just, they're hanging out and they'll kind of get in my way. So I'm just going to clip them a little bit shorter so they're not in my way. Okay, now we're ready to do some sewing. I was just zigzagging in the last video, so I need to set my machine back to a regular straight stitch. Now starting from the right front where the buttons are going to go, I'm going to use the method of attaching entree to fabric. And I'm going to lower my needle so it's right next to the entree ladder on the blue mark. I'm going to tack it down with a couple of stitches, and then removing my pins as I come to them, I'm going to sew. Let me see if I can show this a little bit better. I'm going to sew my entree to the neck edge. Okay, this will take me a minute to sew, so I'm not going to show you that. Okay, now I'm about 1 inch from the left front facing, so I'm going to continue sewing along the entree ladder. And when I get to the blue mark, I'm going to tack the entree to the garment. Okay, now I can take it out and clip my threads. Now you notice we have some lace and entree hanging out here at the front. What'll happen is eventually we're going to turn the corner and sew this on down the front edge, but not yet. Okay, the next thing I want to do, rather than using my ironing board, well, the next thing I need to do is everywhere we had a clip in the entree, we need to go back and clip the pink Swiss batiste. That way, when I fold it back, it will fan out smoothly. So this will take me a minute to clip all of these. Okay, so I have clipped all along the neckline. The entree was clipped before, but now the Swiss batiste is clipped also. So starting up at this left front facing, I'm going to finger fold this, and you can see my buttonhole here now. My buttonhole starts about a 1/4 of an inch below my the entree ladder, and I'm going to finger fold all along this neckline. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to zigzag between the entree hole and the fold of the batiste. So that'll take me a minute to do. Okay, so I've got that finger folded all the way along the neckline. I'm going to start up at the right front facing again, set my machine to a zigzag and my stitch length and width to entree sewing. And I'm still using white thread. And I'm going to tack the entree right at the front neck facing first. And then I'm going to slowly zigzag, keeping my sewing machine needle in the entree ladder on the right and just catching the fold of the fabric on the left. Okay, this will take me a minute to do. Okay, so I have gotten to the left front facing, and I have that tacked down all along the neck of the garment on the inside. Now let me clip my threads. And we're just about finished attaching the neckband. Now this piece is still hanging out. That's going to go along the front. Okay, now using your specialty scissors, we can reach in and begin to trim this entree from the neckline. And I'll put a link to the specialty scissors down below again in case you still don't have any and you're thinking, oh, you know, I've been trying to do this and I finally want to get a pair. Okay, so that'll take me a minute to get that trimmed. Okay, so I have trimmed my entree on the inside. This piece is still hanging out here on the left, but in the next video, we'll start taking care of that. Now I'm going to turn the garment over to the back and do a couple of last little steps. That lower gathering thread is showing, so using my seam ripper, I'm going to pull that thread out, and on the inside, I'm going to grab the bobbin thread and pull it out also, if I can get it. Okay. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do, as you can see, when we originally smocked this and we left our pleating threads in, we didn't have a blocking guide, but now we can block this garment because you can see it fans out a little wider than the smocking. So I'm going to go ahead and clip my smocking threads. They're tied together 2 at a time. Remove my smocking threads. And then I can go to my ironing board and block this a little bit. Just stretch it a little bit so that it kind of stretches out a little bit. And you can block it with the ironing board if you want to. Okay, so sewing the gathered lace and entree to the neckline is what we were doing today. In the next video, we will be taking care of this extra piece that's hanging off over here and sewing down along the front edge of the buttonholes. But that's what we're doing today. Thank you.